the interstellar conservation habitat on Quelm 6, was, to put it mildly, the galaxy's most expensive zoo for things that could absolutely kill you. Not might kill you. Would kill you, given half a chance and maybe a slow Tuesday. Well, the galactic equivalent anyway. Before we begin, YouTube shows me that 93% of you haven't subscribed yet. Subscribing is free, it really supports our community, and I'd love for you to be part of it. Also, drop a comment and let me know where you're watching from. The facility sprawled across 200 square kilometers of carefully terraformed landscape, each enclosure meticulously designed to house apex predators so dangerous that most civilized species had spent the last 1,000 years trying very hard to forget they existed. Felix had been working there for 8 months, and he still couldn't quite believe they paid him for this. The human stood in the observation corridor of Habitat Wing 12, hands tucked into the pockets of his standard-issue jumpsuit, watching the reinforced transparent barrier that separated him from certain death. Beyond that barrier, in an enclosure designed to mimic the volcanic plains of some distant Andromeda world, 3 Velora cubs tumbled over each other in what passed for play among the galaxy's most feared predators. Velora, 6-limbed feline nightmares that made Earth's big cats look like house pets. Each cub was already the size of a full-grown lion, covered in midnight blue fur that shimmered with bioluminescent patterns, and equipped with retractable claws that could slice through starship hull plating. Their adults could take down prey 10 times their size, hunt in perfect silence, and possessed an intelligence that made them terrifyingly effective killers. The Quelm Directorate had spent a fortune bringing them here, preserving the last breeding population after their homeworld got a little too close to a supernova. Conservation, they called it. Felix called it organized insanity, with a really good benefits package. You are too close to the barrier again. Felix didn't turn around. He recognized that voice, the perpetual note of anxiety that seemed hardwired into every syllable. Grenth, his supervisor, a being that looked like someone had crossed a salamander with a very nervous accountant, and then given the result, a clipboard and stress-induced ulcers. The barrier's rated for a direct assault from a full-grown Velora, Felix said, still watching the cubs. I think I'm safe from the babies. Babies? Grenth's translation implant somehow managed to convey exasperation in 3 languages simultaneously. Those babies weigh 200 kilograms each and have a bite force that could crush your skull like a... He paused, searching for the right comparison. Like a very crushable thing. Poetic. This is not a joking matter, Felix. The amphibian-like alien shuffled closer, his webbed feet making soft squelching sounds on the polished floor. The adult Velora are currently sedated for their quarterly medical examinations. If something goes wrong, if the cubs become agitated... Grenth. Felix finally turned to face his supervisor, offering what he hoped was a reassuring smile. I've been observing predator behavior since before I left Earth. I know what I'm doing. On your planet, yes. Here, the predators are from 100 different worlds, with 100 different behavioral patterns, and 100 different ways to kill you that your species has never even encountered. Grenth clutched his datapad tighter. The regulations are very clear. Observation from a minimum distance of 5 meters. No sudden movements. No vocalizations that might... I know the regulations, Felix said gently. I helped write half of them, remember? Grenth's throat sac inflated and deflated in what Felix had learned was the equivalent of a long-suffering sigh. Just, please, try not to give me a cardiac incident before my shift ends. I have only 3 of my 5 hearts functioning optimally as it is. I'll do my best. The supervisor retreated, muttering in his native language, something that the translator mercifully decided not to process. Felix turned back to the enclosure, his attention drawn to one cub in particular. It was smaller than its siblings, the runt of the litter, though calling any Velora a runt felt like calling a tiger a house cat. This one had been watching Felix for the past 10 minutes, head tilted at an angle that suggested curiosity rather than hunger, while its brothers, or sisters, sexual dimorphism in Velora didn't present until adolescence, wrestled and pounced on each other. This one sat apart, focused entirely on the strange two-legged creature on the other side of the barrier. Felix crouched down, bringing himself closer to eye level with the cub. Professional curiosity, he told himself. Absolutely not, because the thing was, in its own terrifying way, kind of adorable. The cub's ears perked up. It took a tentative step forward, then another, padding across the synthetic rocks until it was pressed against the barrier, barely a meter from Felix. Up close, he could see the intricate patterns in its fur, bioluminescent markings that pulsed gently with each heartbeat. Its eyes, all 4 of them, arranged in a way that gave it nearly 360-degree vision, watched him with unsettling intelligence. "Hey there, little one," Felix murmured, knowing the cub couldn't understand human speech, but finding comfort in the familiar rhythm of conversation. "Curious, aren't you? Your siblings are too busy beating each other up to notice the weird alien watching them. But not you. You want to know what I am?" The cub tilted its head the other way. Its mouth opened slightly, revealing rows of teeth that would make a great white shark jealous. And then it roared. Well, roared was generous. It was more of a high-pitched squeal, the kind of sound a creature makes when it's trying very hard to be intimidating, but hasn't quite figured out how yet. The galactic equivalent of a kitten's hiss. By Velora standards, it was probably adorable. By the standards of literally any other species in the facility, it was the sound that preceded violent death. Felix blinked. Then, before his brain could properly process what he was about to do, before common sense or survival instinct or the 8 months of safety training could kick in, he did something monumentally stupid. He roared back. Not a human shout, not a yell, a roar. Deep, guttural, rising from somewhere in his chest that he didn't know could produce that kind of sound. It echoed off the corridor walls, a primal noise that carried every ounce of human stubbornness and the evolutionary memory of a species that had clawed its way to the top of its food chain through sheer bloody-minded refusal to be eaten. The cub's reaction was instantaneous. It dropped. Not gradually, not in stages, but in one fluid motion, belly to the ground, ears flat against its skull, all 4 eyes wide and fixed on Felix. The bioluminescent patterns in its fur flickered, dimming to almost nothing. Its tail, which had been swishing playfully seconds before, tucked tight against its body. Submission. Complete. Total. Instinctive submission. Felix stared. The cub stared back, not moving, barely breathing. In the control room 3 floors above, Grenth's primary heart stopped. Just for a second, but long enough that the medical monitor attached to his workstation let out a warning beep. His datapad clattered to the floor. The security feed showed Felix, still crouched by the barrier, and the Velora cub, prostrate before him like he was some kind of... What did he do? Grenth's voice came out as a strangled whisper. What in the name of the first spawning did he just do? Around the facility, in a dozen different enclosures, predators that had been lounging or feeding or engaging in territorial disputes all stopped. Just stopped. Heads raised, ears pricked, attention focused on something they couldn't see, but definitely felt. The two other Velcora cubs abandoned their wrestling match, staring at their sibling with confusion and something that might have been concern. Felix, heart hammering in his chest, slowly straightened up. The cub tracked his movement but didn't change position, still pressed flat against the ground. "Oh," Felix said quietly, his voice not quite steady. "Oh, that's not normal." Behind him, the corridor door burst open with enough force to dent the wall. Grenth came scrambling through, moving faster than Felix had ever seen him move, his skin flushed a deep green that indicated either rage or panic, or possibly both. "The control room," Grenth managed, pointing one webbed finger back the way he'd come. "Now, immediately, this instant." "I can explain. Control room." Felix glanced back at the cub, which was still frozen in place, watching him. He raised one hand slowly, a gesture that meant nothing to a Velcora, but felt appropriate somehow. The cub's ears twitched, but it didn't move. "Yeah," Felix muttered, following Grenth's rapidly retreating form. "This is going to be hard to explain." The Scifi control room was organized chaos. Grenth had already pulled up the security footage, the holographic display showing the last 60 seconds on a loop. Felix's roar, the cub's immediate submission, the shocked silence that followed. 3 other staff members had crowded into the small space, drawn by Grenth's panicked summons. Lantha hovered near the ceiling, her translucent body rippling with colors that Felix had learned indicated extreme scientific interest. The jellyfish-like xenobiologist had at least 20 tentacles, and currently 15 of them were taking notes. "Fascinating," she murmured, her voice like wind chimes in a breeze. "Absolutely fascinating. Play it again, Grenth." "I would rather not," Grenth said, but he played it again anyway. Quill perched on the edge of a console, his feathered form ruffled in agitation. The communications specialist clicked his beak twice, a sound his translator rendered as a thoughtful hum. "The frequency analysis is all wrong. Human vocalizations shouldn't register in the Velcora's threat response range. They're not even close." "And yet," Maeve chimed in, their crystalline body refracting the holographic light into rainbow patterns across the walls, the response was immediate and unmistakable. That cub recognized Felix as a dominant predator, not a potential threat, not an unknown variable, a superior predator. Felix, leaning against the far wall and trying to process what he'd done, spoke up. "I didn't mean to. It was just instinct." The cub roared, and I responded. I wasn't thinking. "Clearly," Grenth said, his voice dripping with sarcasm that transcended species barriers. "You weren't thinking when you violated protocol, scared a Velcora cub into submission, and triggered what I can only describe as a facility-wide predator alert." "There wasn't an alert," Felix pointed out. "There wasn't an alarm. There was definitely an alert. Every carnivore in this building knows something just happened. They just don't know what." Grenth pulled up another screen, showing feeds from multiple enclosures. Predators from a dozen worlds, all watching, waiting, confused. "This is unprecedented." Lantha drifted lower, several of her tentacles reaching toward Felix in a gesture that might have been curiosity or concern. "How did you know to do that? The roar, the projection of dominance. Did you study Velcora vocal patterns?" "No," Felix admitted. It felt right. Like when you see a dog being aggressive and you use a firm voice to establish authority. Except, not a dog. A 6-limbed alien death machine." "Dogs," Quill repeated, tasting the unfamiliar word. "Small Earth predators, correct?" pack hunters? We domesticated them about 15,000 years ago, Felix said. Turned them into pets, companions. The room went silent. 3 alien species stared at the human with expressions that ranged from disbelief to horror to scientific fascination. You domesticated predators, Maeve said slowly, their crystalline form pulsing with light. You took wild hunters and made them into, what, household companions? Well, yeah. We also domesticated wolves, which are bigger. And cats, though honestly, cats kind of domesticated themselves. And we kept snakes, lizards, birds of prey. Felix trailed off, noticing the looks he was getting. Is this weird? Weird, Grenth said faintly, is not the word I would use. Terrifying, inexplicable, deeply concerning. Those words, yes. Lantha's colors shifted to a deep purple. On my world, predators are studied from orbit. The thought of intentionally cohabitating with one it's unthinkable. Same here, Quill added. We monitor, we observe, we maintain strict separation. The idea that a species would willingly share living space with something that could kill them. Dogs can't kill humans, Felix protested. Well, some can, but mostly they're friendly, loyal. We bred them that way. You altered their evolutionary path to make them loyal to you. Maeve's voice held a note of what might have been awe. You shaped predators into allies. Felix rubbed the back of his neck, uncomfortable with the direction this conversation was taking. Look, can we focus on what just happened? The cub, the roar, the bowing thing? Submission, Lantha corrected. Complete instinctive submission to a recognized apex predator, which should be impossible. You're not a Velora. You're not even from the same evolutionary tree. There's no biological basis for that response. Unless, Quill said quietly, there is. Everyone turned to look at the bird-like alien. He ruffled his feathers again, a nervous gesture. I've been studying human communication patterns since Felix arrived. Not just language, but the underlying structures. Humans use a lot of non-verbal cues, body language, tonal variations that convey meaning beyond words. And there's something else, something I couldn't quite quantify until now. Which is? Grenth prompted. Conviction, Quill said. When humans speak, when they really mean something, there's a quality to it that bypasses translation matrices. It's not what they say, it's how they say it. The certainty behind it. The intent. Felix frowned. You're saying what? Intimidated the cub through sheer willpower? Not willpower. Presence. Lantha had started pulsing with excited colors again. Oh, this is magnificent. Quill, you might be onto something. What if human vocalizations carry more than just acoustic information? What if there's a psychological component that registers across species barriers? That's not scientifically possible, Grenth objected, but his voice lacked conviction. Neither is a human making a Velora cub bow, Maeve pointed out. And yet, we all watched it happen. Felix pushed off from the wall, approaching the holographic display. The footage was still looping, showing the moment over and over. Cub roars, human roars back, cub submits. Simple, impossible, terrifying. So what do we do about it? He asked. The room fell silent again. 4 alien scientists looked at each other, then at the human, then at each other again. Finally, Grenth spoke, his voice heavy with resignation. We run tests, controlled, careful, extremely well-documented tests. And we pray to whatever deities we individually believe in that the Directorate doesn't find out about this until we understand what we're dealing with. And if they do find out? Felix asked. Grenth's throat sac inflated to twice its normal size. Then we're all getting reassigned to cataloging space plankton in the outer rim. And you, my friend, are going to spend the rest of your life explaining to bureaucrats how a human scared the most dangerous predator in the Andromeda sector into submission by yelling at it. Felix looked back at the holographic display, at the frozen image of the Velora cub, still pressed against the ground, eyes wide with instinctive recognition of something it shouldn't have been able to recognize. "Yeah," he said softly. "That sounds about right." Outside, in the enclosure, the small cub finally stood up, shaking itself like it was waking from a dream. Its siblings approached cautiously, sniffing at it, checking for injuries or threats. The cub seemed fine, if a little confused, and within minutes, all three were back to playing, wrestling, being normal Velora cubs. But every so often, the small one would pause and look toward the corridor, toward the spot where the strange two-legged creature had been, looking for the predator that had roared back. The next morning arrived with all the enthusiasm of a funeral procession. Felix hadn't slept well, his dreams filled with roaring cubs and disapproving supervisors, and he arrived at the facility to find Grenth had already assembled what could only be described as a scientific inquisition. The main laboratory was bigger than the control room, with enough space for proper experimental setups and, more importantly, enough room for Grenth to pace anxiously while muttering about career-ending incidents and regulatory violations. The amphibian had clearly been up all night, his skin a sickly gray-green that suggested exhaustion and possibly the alien equivalent of too much caffeine. Lantha floated near the ceiling, her tentacles arranged around her like a halo, taking notes on 3 different data pads simultaneously. Quill perched on a reinforced stand, preening his feathers in what Felix had learned was a nervous habit. Maeve stood in the corner, their crystalline body refracting the overhead lights into geometric patterns across the walls, running calculations that appeared as glowing equations in the air around them. "Right," Grenth said, stopping his pacing long enough to fix Felix with a look that suggested deep professional concern mixed with personal betrayal. "Let us establish the parameters of what we are about to do. We are going to conduct a series of controlled experiments to determine whether yesterday's incident was a fluke, a statistical anomaly, or evidence that humans possess some kind of cross-species predator dominance field." "Dominance field makes it sound like a superpower," Felix said. "If it exists, it essentially is." Maeve's voice chimed like crystal bells. "The ability to assert dominance over predator species you have never encountered, from evolutionary trees completely separate from your own, would be, well, unprecedented doesn't even begin to cover it." Lantha drifted lower, her colors shifting to an excited amber. "I spent the entire night reviewing xenobiological literature. There are myths, legends, from a dozen civilizations about apex predators that could dominate through presence alone. The Ku then had stories about the first hunter, a being that could walk among predators unchallenged. The Velora themselves have ancient texts about the silent alpha, a creature that needed no pack because all packs bowed to it. But these are myths, Felix, evolutionary impossibilities. And yet, here we are," Felix finished. He looked around the lab, at the various containment areas that had been set up overnight, each one holding a different juvenile creature from the facility's collection. "So, what's the plan? I just roar at things until something interesting happens?" "Absolutely not." Grenth pulled up a holographic display showing a detailed experimental protocol. "We proceed scientifically, methodically, with proper controls, safety measures, and documentation that will satisfy even the most pedantic directorate inspector. We test multiple species across different predator classifications, record all vocalizations and responses, and analyze the data before drawing any conclusions. Also, Quill added, we have emergency sedation systems standing by, medical teams on alert, and I personally have my hand on the emergency lockdown protocols. If anything goes wrong, we shut everything down and pretend this never happened. Comforting, Felix muttered. The first test subject was brought in by remote drone, a small containment unit that was carefully placed in the center of the lab. Inside was a shrill-wing hatchling, barely the size of a house cat, covered in downy feathers that would eventually harden into the armored plumage of its species. Shrill wings were prey animals, herbivores from a low-gravity world, known for being skittish and possessing approximately the survival instincts of a particularly dim-witted moth. This serves as our control, Lantha explained, her tentacles gesturing toward the container. A non-predator species. If your vocalization triggers a response in this creature, we'll know we're dealing with something broader than predator-specific communication. Felix approached the container slowly, watching the hatchling flutter nervously inside. Its 3 eyes blinked out of sync, and it made a soft chirping sound that the translator rendered as general, confusion, and mild distress. "Whenever you're ready," Grenth said, his webbed fingers hovering over the medical monitoring equipment. Felix took a breath, feeling suddenly ridiculous. Here he was, about to roar at what was essentially a space chicken in the name of science. Still, after yesterday, ridiculous seemed to be his new normal. He let out a low growl, not quite the full roar he'd given the Velora cub, but enough to test the waters. The shrill-wing hatchling blinked, chirped, looked around its container like it was searching for the source of an interesting but ultimately meaningless noise. Then it went back to pecking at the food pellets scattered across the floor of its enclosure. "No response," Maeve announced, their equations shifting to reflect the new data. No change in heart rate, stress hormones, or behavioral patterns. It registered the sound, but showed no recognition of threat or dominance. "It thinks you're furniture," Quill observed. "Loud furniture, but furniture nonetheless." Felix couldn't help but smile. "So, prey species don't care. That's actually good to know." "One data point," Grenth cautioned, but there was relief in his voice. "Let's continue." The shrill wing was removed, and a new container was brought in. This one held something that looked like a cross between a praying mantis and a small bear, covered in chitinous plates and possessing too many joints in all the wrong places. A mantle stalker pup, according to the holographic label. Ambush predator, primarily insectivorous, known for patience and a hunting style that involved waiting motionless for hours before striking with blinding speed. The pup clicked its mandibles together, a sound like castanets, watching Felix with compound eyes that reflected the lab lights in 1,000 tiny fragments. Felix felt his pulse quicken. This was it, the real test. A predator, not a prey animal. If yesterday was a fluke, if it was just coincidence or some quirk of Velora biology, then this creature would ignore him just like the shrill wing had. He met those compound eyes, took a breath, and barked. Sharp, commanding, the kind of sound you'd use to stop a dog from doing something stupid. The mantle stalker froze, every joint locked, every plate sealed tight, its entire body going rigid in the space of a heartbeat. The clicking stopped. The pup remained motionless for 5 full seconds, and then, slowly, deliberately, it backed away from the front of the container, pressing itself against the far wall. "Oh, you have got to be kidding me," Grenth whispered. Lantha's tentacles were a blur of motion, recording everything. Stress response confirmed. Elevated heart rate, defensive posturing, clear avoidance behavior. It recognized him. Felix, it recognized you as a threat. More than a threat, Maeve corrected, their calculations spinning faster. Avoidance without aggression. That's not fear of danger. That's submission to superior force. It's not preparing to fight or flee. It's yielding territory. Felix stepped back from the container, and the mantle stalker relaxed incrementally, though it kept its distance. The pup's mandibles started clicking again, but softer now, uncertain. 2 for 2 on predators, Quill said quietly. This isn't a fluke. They ran the test again with the second Velora cub, a different one from yesterday's encounter. Same result. The moment Felix let out a proper roar, the cub dropped into that same submissive crouch, ears flat, bioluminescent patterns dimming. It was like watching a switch flip, instinct overriding everything else. This is impossible, Grenth kept saying, but his protests were getting weaker with each test. This violates every principle of evolutionary biology. You can't have dominance recognition across species barriers. You can't have. And yet, Lantha said, her colors now a brilliant gold that indicated pure scientific euphoria. Here it is, happening. Reproducible, documentable. The fourth test subject was a Grendelish juvenile, a pack hunter from a high-gravity world, built low and heavy with powerful jaws, and a reputation for stubbornness that made Earth's honey badgers look cooperative. Grendelish were reptilian, vaguely crocodilian, and known for never backing down from a challenge. This one snarled the moment Felix approached, a wet, rasping sound that came from deep in its throat. Its scaled hide rippled with muscle, and its tail lashed against the container walls hard enough to dent the reinforced material. Felix didn't hesitate. He growled back, low and resonant, putting everything he had into it. Not just sound, but intent. The same primal certainty that had made him roar at the Velora cub without thinking. The Grendelish's snarl cut off like someone had hit a mute button. Its eyes, yellow and slitted, went wide. The aggressive posturing stopped, and then, in a move that made Grenth actually gasp, the juvenile tucked its tail and let out a soft whimper. A Grendelish, whimpering. "I'm going to need a minute," Grenth said faintly, lowering himself onto a bench before his legs gave out entirely. Felix stared at the container, at the now docile predator that was watching him with something that looked uncomfortably like respect, or fear, or both. "Okay," he said slowly. "Okay. So it's not just Velora. It's all of them. Any predator species. I do the thing. They submit. That's what we're seeing here, right? I'm not hallucinating this? If you are, we're all sharing the same hallucination," Quill said. His feathers were completely ruffled now, standing almost on end. "Felix, do you understand what this means? You're broadcasting something, some signal that transcends language, biology, evolutionary history. You're telling these creatures, on a level deeper than conscious thought, that you're an apex predator. And they're believing you." Maeve's crystalline form pulsed with rapid calculations. "I've been running the numbers. The probability of this being coincidence is now statistically 0. 4 different predator species, 4 different evolutionary trees, 4 identical responses. The pattern is undeniable." Lantha drifted down until she was at eye level with Felix, her translucent body shimmering. "The question is, how? Humans are predators, yes, but you're not physically imposing compared to most species here. You don't have natural weapons, enhanced senses, or overwhelming strength. By all objective measures, you shouldn't register as a threat to a Velora or a Grendelish. And yet, they're treating me like I could eat them for breakfast, Felix finished. He ran a hand through his hair, trying to process this. Lantha, you mentioned myths earlier. The Silent Alpha, the first hunter. What if those weren't myths? What if there really were species that could do this? And humans, we're the last ones who still have it. The xenobiologist's colors shifted through a spectrum of thoughtful hues. Most species evolved past their predator origins. We became civilized, developed technology, moved beyond the need for hunting and territorial dominance. We kept the intelligence, discarded the aggression. But humans, we kept both, Felix said quietly. We became civilized, sure, built cities, invented philosophy, went to space, but we never stopped being predators. We just got better at hiding it. Grenth had recovered enough to stand, though he still looked like he'd been hit by a hovercraft. This is going to change everything. If word gets out that humans can dominate predator species through vocalization alone, the implications for conservation work, for security, for everything. If word gets out, Quill interrupted, Felix is going to be classified as a galactic-level predator species. Him specifically, maybe all humans in general. Do you know what kind of restrictions that comes with? The monitoring, the regulations, the paranoia? Not to mention, Maeve added, their tone grim despite the crystalline chiming of their voice. There are species who would want to weaponize this. Imagine soldiers who can walk into an enemy enclosure and make their guard beasts submit, or handlers who can control dangerous wildlife without technology. The military applications alone. No. Felix's voice was sharp enough that everyone stopped and looked at him. No, we're not doing that. This isn't a weapon, and I'm not letting it become one. We figure out what this is, we document it properly, and we use it for its intended purpose, helping these animals. That's it. Noble sentiment, Grenth said, but naive. The Directorate will want answers, and they won't be gentle about getting them. Then we don't tell the Directorate. Felix looked around the lab, at the 4 alien scientists who had become something like friends over the past 8 months. Not yet. Not until we understand this well enough to control the narrative. Can we do that? Silence. Long, heavy silence, filled only by the soft hum of equipment and the distant sounds of creatures in their enclosures. Finally, Lantha spoke. We'd be violating about 30 different protocols, possibly committing career suicide. Almost certainly committing career suicide, Maeve corrected. And if we get caught, Quill added, they'll shut down the research and possibly quarantine Felix as a biological hazard. Grenth's throat sac inflated and deflated 3 times before he spoke. I hate this. I hate everything about this. I hate that you're asking me to ignore regulations. I hate that you've somehow turned my nice, safe, boring job into a galactic incident waiting to happen. And I especially hate that I'm about to agree to help you. Felix felt hope spark in his chest. You'll help? Someone has to make sure you don't accidentally declare dominance over the entire facility and start a panic. Grenth picked up his datapad, fingers moving across the surface with practiced efficiency. But we do this my way, carefully, methodically, with documentation that will hold up when, not if, when this all comes out. Understood? Understood, Felix said. Lantha's colors shifted to a determined crimson. I'm in. This is the most fascinating xenobiological phenomenon I've encountered in my entire career. There's no way I'm missing this. Same, Quill said, ruffling his feathers one more time before settling them. Though I'm lodging a formal complaint that my life was much less complicated before you arrived, Felix. Maeve's crystalline form chimed with what might have been laughter. I'll run the statistical models. Someone needs to make sense of the data. And apparently, that someone is me. Felix looked at each of them in turn, these alien beings who were willing to risk their careers to help him understand what he was. Thank you, all of you. I know this is insane, Grenth supplied. Reckless, potentially catastrophic, but also, apparently, necessary. He pulled up a new holographic display, this one showing a schedule. We have approximately 6 days before the Directorate's next inspection. That gives us 6 days to gather data, formulate a hypothesis, and prepare a presentation that won't result in all of us being fired and Felix being shipped off to a research facility for the rest of his natural life. 6 days, Felix repeated. No pressure, then. Oh, there's tremendous pressure, Maeve said cheerfully. The kind of pressure that could literally end our careers and possibly trigger a galactic incident. But let's try to stay positive. Quill clicked his beak in what the translator rendered as sardonic amusement. Positive. Right. We're studying a human who can make the galaxy's deadliest predators submit through the power of yelling at them. What could possibly go wrong? In the containers around the lab, 4 juvenile predators watched the strange gathering of aliens with varying degrees of interest and confusion. Brother T. Velora cub had curled up in the corner of its enclosure, but its eyes remained fixed on Felix, tracking his movements with unblinking attention. The mantle-stalker pup had resumed its clicking, though it stayed pressed against the far wall, as far from the human as the container allowed. The Grendelish juvenile had stopped whimpering, but it remained motionless, watchful, waiting to see what this apex predator would do next. And, somewhere in the facility, in an enclosure designed to hold the most dangerous creatures the galaxy had to offer, adult Velora were beginning to wake from their sedation, their enhanced senses already detecting something new in their environment. Something that smelled like prey, but felt like a predator. Something that would, very soon, challenge everything they thought they knew about the hierarchy of hunters. Felix didn't know it yet, but he was about to have a conversation with the apex predator of the Andromeda sector. And this time, it wouldn't be a cub. The secret lasted exactly 38 hours before Quill ruined everything. To be fair, it wasn't entirely his fault. The bird-like alien had been analyzing communication patterns in the facility's commissary, discussing harmonic frequencies with a colleague from the botanical wing, when he'd mentioned, casually, just in passing, really, that humans might possess an undocumented ability to project predator dominance across species barriers. His colleague, a gossip who made tabloid journalists look discreet, had immediately contacted 6 friends. Those friends contacted others. By the time Grenth found out, half the facility staff was whispering about the human who could make Velora bow. The amphibian's skin turned a shade of purple that Felix was reasonably certain indicated imminent violence. "You told someone," Grenth hissed, cornering Quill in the lab, while Lantha and Maeve watched with what could only be described as morbid fascination. "We had one rule, one single, simple rule. Don't tell anyone. And you just—" It slipped out. Quill's feathers were completely flat against his body, a sign of extreme distress. I was excited. We made a groundbreaking discovery, and I got caught up in the moment, and it came up in conversation. It came up in conversation, Grenth repeated, his voice dangerously quiet. How does accidentally revealing classified research come up in casual conversation? Felix, leaning against a workstation and trying not to laugh at the absurdity of it all, raised a hand. So, what happens now? Now, a new voice said from the doorway. "We have a problem." Everyone turned to see a figure that radiated bureaucratic authority like a small, well-dressed sun. Fenwick was tall for his species, which meant he came up to about Felix's shoulder, covered in sleek fur that looked perpetually groomed, with large eyes that missed absolutely nothing. He was from a prey species, one that had survived on a predator-heavy world through intelligence, paranoia, and an almost supernatural ability to spot danger. He was also the Quelm Directorate's head inspector, and he looked thoroughly unimpressed. "Inspector Fenwick," Grenth managed, his skin cycling through colors like a distressed mood ring. We weren't expecting, obviously." Fenwick stepped into the lab, his movements precise and controlled. "I've been hearing very interesting rumors about your human employee. Something about dominance displays and impossible predator responses. I assume these rumors are completely unfounded and based on misunderstandings." The lab was silent. Nobody moved. Felix was fairly certain nobody breathed. Fenwick's whiskers twitched. "Or perhaps you'd like to demonstrate whatever it is you've been hiding from the Directorate for the past 2 days." Grenth looked at Felix. Felix looked at Lantha. Lantha looked at Maeve. Maeve looked at Quill. Quill looked at the floor and wished desperately to be anywhere else. "Well," Felix said finally, pushing off from the workstation, "this should be interesting." Fenwick was not impressed. The inspector stood with his arms folded, clipboard floating beside him via anti-grav technology, watching the team scramble to set up what Grenth kept insisting was a perfectly reasonable demonstration and definitely not a violation of approximately 43 safety protocols. "Let me understand this correctly," Fenwick said, his voice carrying the patient tone of someone explaining reality to very slow children. "You want me to believe that this human, this Felix, can assert dominance over predator species through vocalization alone. Species he has never encountered before. Species from completely different evolutionary backgrounds. And you expect me to accept this based on, what, a few juveniles responding to loud noises?" "It's more than loud noises," Lantha protested, her tentacles gesturing emphatically. The data shows coincidence and confirmation bias," Fenwick interrupted. "Young animals are easily startled. This proves nothing except that you've all been working too many consecutive shifts and need mandatory rest periods." Felix watched the inspector with growing amusement. The guy was absolutely convinced this was nonsense, which meant the demonstration was going to be either spectacularly vindicating or catastrophically embarrassing. Possibly both. "What would convince you?" Felix asked. Fenwick turned those large prey species eyes on him, whiskers twitching with barely concealed skepticism. "Show me with an adult. Not a cub, not a juvenile, a full-grown mature predator. Something that actually poses a legitimate threat. If you can make a real predator submit, then perhaps, I'll consider that there's something worth investigating here." Grenth made a sound like a deflating balloon. "An adult predator. You want us to put Felix in proximity to an adult predator and have him attempt a dominance display." "That's what I said, yes? That's insane." "That's your claim," Fenwick countered. "If he truly possesses this ability, there should be no danger. The predator will submit. Unless, of course, you're not actually confident in your hypothesis." It was a challenge, pure and simple. Felix could see it in the way Fenwick stood, in the set of his shoulders, in the clipboard that was definitely recording every word for his official report. The inspector was calling their bluff, certain they'd back down. Felix grinned. "All right, let's do it." "Felix, no," Grenth started. but the human was already moving toward the door. "Get Graal's enclosure ready," Felix called back. "If we're doing this, let's do it right. Biggest, meanest Velcora you've got. Let's see what happens when I have a conversation with an apex predator." Behind him, Grenth's skin went completely white. Fenwick's whiskers stopped twitching. And somewhere in the facility, Graal was waking up. The walk to Habitat Wing 12 felt longer than Felix remembered. Grenth kept up a running commentary of why this was a terrible idea, listing reasons in order of severity, while Lantha floated alongside taking notes with an excitement that was either admirably scientific or deeply concerning. Maeve calculated survival probabilities that kept getting lower with each corridor they passed. Quill remained silent, his feathers ruffled into anxious peaks. Fenwick walked behind them all, clipboard still recording, his expression carefully neutral. But Felix could see the tension in the inspector's movements, the way his eyes darted to emergency exits and medical stations. For all his skepticism, Fenwick wasn't stupid. He knew exactly how dangerous this was about to become. "Graal has been with us for 3 years, Grenth said, his voice strained. Battle-scarred, territorial, aggressive even by Velcora standards. He once bit through a reinforced feeding drone because it approached from the wrong angle. The wrong angle, Felix. He has preferences about geometry." "Sounds charming," Felix said, though his palms were starting to sweat. "He's killed 6 members of his own species in territorial disputes," Lantha added helpfully. "Successfully defended his territory against 12 challenges. He's never submitted to anything in his entire documented life." "Great," Felix muttered. "No pressure." They reached the observation corridor. Through the transparent barrier, Felix could see Graal's enclosure, a sprawling landscape of volcanic rock and sparse vegetation. And there, lounging on a boulder like some nightmare made flesh, was Graal himself. The Velcora was massive, easily twice the size of the cubs, covered in midnight blue fur crossed with pale scars that told stories of violence survived. His 6 limbs were pure muscle, claws extended and gleaming in the artificial sunlight. 4 eyes tracked their approach with predatory focus, and when he yawned, Felix counted teeth that could easily remove limbs. "Oh," Felix said quietly. "Oh, that's a big cat."